My stepdad's crazy diet rules had me starving. When I finally stood up to him, the explosive fallout turned our entire house upside down. I'm Erin, 16 years old, and I've been living with my mom, Margaret, 42, and my stepdad, George, 45, for the past 3 years. It wasn't always this complicated. For most of my childhood, it was just me and my mom. My dad left before I was born, and mom never talked much about him. We got by okay. Mom worked long hours as a nurse, making sure I had what I needed. I remember how excited mom was when she started dating George. At first, he seemed nice. He'd come over for dinner, bring me cool gadgets, and take us out for pizza. But when they got married and George moved in, everything changed. Initially, he was just stricter than mom about bedtimes and chores. However, about a year ago, everything shifted when George decided to get healthy. After a health scare, high blood pressure, and being pre-diabetic, he dove into every fad diet he could find. First it was keto, then paleo, then raw vegan. He spent hours watching YouTube videos on clean eating, detoxing, and the latest superfoods. At first, I thought it was harmless, but then George started pushing these habits on me and mom. He threw out all our processed food and began doing all the grocery shopping and cooking. Suddenly, our meals consisted of tiny portions of grilled chicken or fish with steamed veggies. No pasta, no bread, no rice, barely any seasoning. George insisted that anything with sugar or carbs was poison. I've always been active. I've played soccer since I was 5 and joined the varsity basketball team this year. Between practices and games, I was always hungry. Those tiny meals just weren't enough. I tried explaining that I needed more food, especially carbs, to fuel my activities. George would lecture me about how carbs were addictive and how I needed to train my body to run on vegetables and lean protein. Mom mostly went along with him, not wanting to create conflict. Things got worse as George became more extreme. He started forbidding any food he didn't approve of. Once I got caught eating a granola bar from a friend and he completely flipped out, making me empty my backpack and locker. I felt like a criminal in my own home. The constant hunger affected me. I felt tired and irritable. My performance in sports began to suffer. Coaches noticed I was struggling, but I was too embarrassed to explain, so I made excuses about not sleeping well. The situation came to a head before a big soccer tournament. It was important, with college scouts attending. I needed to carb load the night before, so I asked George for pasta or potatoes. He lost it, ranting about my addiction to carbs and how ungrateful I was. I yelled back, "Pasta isn't heroin." The argument escalated, and George told me if I wanted junk food, I could buy and cook it myself. Frustrated, I asked mom if she'd take me grocery shopping for normal food. She hesitated, clearly reluctant to go against George. I snapped, "So you're just going to let your husband starve your kid?" That set off another round of yelling. In the end, no one took me shopping. Desperate for energy, I snuck into the kitchen late at night and ate peanut butter straight from the jar. It was the only calorie-dense food left in the house that George hadn't thrown out. The next day at the tournament, I felt weak and dizzy, barely keeping up with the other players. We lost badly, and I knew it was partly because I was running on empty. Afterward, a college scout pulled me aside, concerned that I seemed off my game. I was so embarrassed I wanted to cry. When we got home, George had the nerve to lecture me about my performance, saying it proved I needed to commit fully to his diet. I couldn't take it anymore. I yelled at him, saying his diet was the reason I played poorly. We got into another huge fight, with mom trying unsuccessfully to mediate. I reached my breaking point. I tried talking to mom privately, but she just told me to go along with what George wanted for family harmony. I felt deprived of basic nutrition. George kept saying I'd thank him later when I was healthy, but I worried about my well-being now. Living in a rural area, there was no public transportation and nowhere nearby to buy food. I didn't have my own money for groceries, even if I could get to a store. I was scared to tell someone at school, worried it would cause more problems at home. So, I turned to Reddit, asking if I was wrong for refusing to eat George's health food and demanding normal meals for an active teenager. I received a flood of responses. To clarify, I had no health issues that required a special diet. I was at a normal weight and very active. George wasn't a doctor or nutritionist just following random health blogs. Motivated by the responses, I decided to take action. The next day after school, I went to see my guidance counselor, Mr. Roberts. I'd always liked him. He listened to students instead of just lecturing. Nervously, I told him everything. Mr. Roberts was genuinely concerned and asked about how long this had been going on. When I shared the soccer tournament disaster, he asked if he could call my mom in for a meeting. I was scared of her reaction, but I agreed. The meeting took place 2 days later. Mom, Mr. Roberts, and I sat down together. At first, she downplayed everything, saying George was just health conscious. But Mr. Roberts was amazing. He explained how dangerous a restrictive diet is for a growing athlete. He even pulled up nutrition guidelines to show her. I could see Mom starting to realize how serious it was. She got quiet and began to cry, admitting she knew things had gotten out of hand but felt stuck between me and George. She opened up about her struggles with weight and how she was afraid of undermining George's health goals. It was the first time I'd ever seen her like that. Mr. Roberts was kind but firm. He suggested family counseling and stressed that immediate changes needed to happen with my diet. He even offered to help Mom find a nutritionist to develop a healthy, balanced meal plan. Mom agreed to take me grocery shopping that day after school. Walking through the store, it felt surreal to finally choose normal food again. We bought whole grains, healthy carbs, and snacks. I kept waiting for Mom to change her mind, but she was determined. When we got home, George freaked out. He yelled about poisoning our bodies and throwing away progress. He accused Mom of not supporting him and said we were trying to make him fat again. It got ugly. But something shifted in Mom that day. She stood her ground, telling George that while she appreciated his health journey, he had taken it too far and it was negatively impacting me. She insisted on regular food options at every meal while George could eat what he wanted. George sulked for days, making snide comments every time I ate something he didn't approve of. But Mom didn't back down. She started cooking separate meals. The change was immediate. I felt full and energized again. I stopped feeling dizzy during practices and could concentrate in class. My mood improved significantly. The real test came with another soccer tournament that weekend. This time I was fueled properly. The difference was night and day. I had energy to spare and played some of my best games. We made it to the finals, and I even scored the winning goal. Mom came to watch, tearing up from the sidelines. After the game, she hugged me tightly, saying how proud she was. On the drive home, she apologized for letting things get so bad. We had a long talk about everything: her relationship with George, her issues with food, and how we could move forward as a family. But tensions at home continued. George barely spoke to me and gave Mom the cold shoulder. He made separate meals and refused to eat with us. I knew this wasn't over. George had serious issues to work through, and I worried about what it was doing to Mom's marriage. At first, George seemed to grudgingly accept the new food situation. He made faces when he saw me eating pasta but kept quiet. My mom was sticking to her guns. I was feeling great, performing well in sports, and even grew an inch. However, the tension in the house became unbearable. George and Mom barely spoke to each other and often slept in separate rooms. George spent most of his time at work or locked in his home office, obsessively watching more health videos. I felt like I was walking on eggshells. Things came to a head when I came home from school one day to find George and Mom in a screaming match. He had gone through her phone and found texts with Mr. Roberts about family counseling options. George lost it, accusing Mom of betraying him and choosing me over him. He brought up old arguments I'd never even heard about and said if we wouldn't follow his lifestyle, he wanted us out. Mom tried to calm him down, explaining that she was just trying to find a healthy balance, but he wouldn't listen. He stormed out of the house and we didn't hear from him for 2 days. Those days were awful. Mom was a mess, crying and checking her phone constantly. I felt terrible. Even though I knew it wasn't my fault. I tried to comfort her, but I didn't know what to say. We ordered pizza one night and watched old movies together, just like we used to. It was nice, but the heaviness of the situation lingered. George returned, calmer but cold. He gave Mom an ultimatum: either we all follow his diet plan 100%, or he wanted a divorce. Mom was devastated. They'd only been married for 4 years, but I knew she loved him. She begged him to reconsider, to try counseling, but he wouldn't budge, saying he had given us a chance and now had to protect his health. Mom was torn, crying and trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to tell her to give in to George so she wouldn't lose her marriage. I hated seeing her upset. But another part of me was furious at him for putting her in this position. I was scared of going back to how things were always hungry and miserable. I didn't know what would happen next. My mom spent a lot of time on the phone with her sister, Aunt Carla, talking about possibly staying with her for a while. I felt stressed, unsure how to help. I just wanted things to go back to normal, but I didn't even know what normal was anymore. In my final update, I'm happy to say things have turned for the better. After George's ultimatum, Mom was a wreck for a few days, but then something in her snapped. She apologized for letting things get so out of control and realized she had prioritized her marriage over my health. She opened up about her struggles with self-esteem and how she worried about being enough for her partners. My mom called Aunt Carla, explaining everything. Aunt Carla was furious and offered for us to stay with her while we figured things out. Aunt Carla has always been the cool aunt. She's single, travels for her job, and has an awesome apartment in the city. Last weekend, while George was away, Mom and I packed our things and moved to Aunt Carla's. She left George a letter explaining that she couldn't accept his ultimatum. Living with Aunt Carla has been amazing. It feels so much more relaxed than our house did. There's no tension and no one is policing our food. Aunt Carla is supportive, helping Mom find a therapist to work through her issues. And the food? Aunt Carla loves to cook and teaches me how to make all kinds of dishes. We've made homemade pizza, lasagna, stir fries. Everything is balanced and delicious. I forgot how much joy food can bring when it's not treated like the enemy. George has been bombarding Mom with calls and texts. At first, he was angry, calling us weak-willed for not sticking to his plan. But over time, his tone shifted. He started begging Mom to come back, promising to change. Part of me hopes he means it, but I am also scared to return to how things were. Mom has been firm. She told George that if he wants any chance at saving their marriage, he needs professional help for his controlling behavior. As for me, I'm doing great. I've gained weight and have more energy. I've joined a new soccer team at school and the coach is impressed with my skills. I'm even considering trying out for the swim team in the spring. The best part is how much closer I've become with my mom. We talk openly now about our lives. She shares stories from before I was born, including her struggles. I feel like I understand her better now and she understands me too. I know we have a long road ahead. Mom and George have a lot to work through, and who knows if their marriage will survive. There's uncertainty about what will happen next year, but for now, I'm grateful to feel safe, healthy, and cared for. This experience has taught me the importance of standing up for myself and balance in all things, including diet. I've started learning more about nutrition, and I'm interested in studying sports medicine or nutrition in college. Thank you all for your support and advice throughout this journey. I couldn't have found the courage to speak up without you. If there's one thing I hope people take from my story, it's this: trust your body and don't let anyone shame you for taking care of your needs. Health looks different for everyone and no one diet fits all.